Well, hello there. It is your cool friend who had the grapefruit-sized appendix removed out of her, ready to read the story that obviously you're curious about since you're here. So here it goes, the largest appendix in Palm Beach County. Pain has never been a particularly reliable indicator that something is wrong with me. I've lived with chronic pain for most of my life in one form or another. By the time I was 21, I had already spent a couple years with a PCOS diagnosis, so random stabbing pains throughout my abdomen were about as alarming as getting caught in an afternoon Florida rainstorm. Annoying and inconvenient? Absolutely. Worth freaking out and arranging my life over? Usually not. Adding chronic anxiety into the mix, which loves to express itself by convincing my body that it's dying over absolutely nothing, I'd gotten shockingly good at smiling through pain. As long as I could still walk, talk, and crack a joke here and there, then whatever was going on probably wasn't worth an ER bill. With all that said, when my stomach started hurting on Saturday, August 11th, 2018, I didn't think anything of it. I still dragged myself to my shift at Hobby Lobby. Now, I had accepted this job thinking it was going to be a dream come true. Sure, there were coworkers I wasn't particularly excited about, but my interactions with them were far and few between. The job itself should have been the best thing to happen to me. I mean, I'm an artist, crafter. Surely getting paid to be surrounded by art supplies all day was going to be magic. It wasn't. Sometimes it felt like customers were all conspiring to all arrive at the exact same time, all convinced that their project was more important. All the while, I'm there wrestling fabric bolts the size of toddlers across the counter, writing prices on tiny pieces of paper and calculating the price with a calculator more akin to a plastic brick. Turns out there's only so much excitement one can squeeze out of standing behind a fabric counter, waiting for someone to need 10 different fabrics cut at 10 different lengths. Needless to say, I was already applying anywhere else. On Sunday, the pain was still there, but the rhythm of church and being around friends has a funny way of convincing you to ignore your body for a few hours. This is especially the case when you're already assuming it's just your anxiety or your period making a dramatic entrance. I made it through sacrament meetings, smiled at people, carried on usual conversations, and silently counted down the hours until I could curl back up in bed. Then Monday arrived. August 13th, 2018, the 19th birthday of my little brother Leo. I woke up that morning and immediately knew something was different. Not necessarily worse, at least not yet, but different. Instead of the familiar cramping I'd grown accustomed to, the pain seemed to radiate across my entire abdomen. The pain was a deep heaviness, like someone filled my stomach with wet concrete. I got out of bed to start my day and found that even though walking was painful, I was still on my feet. I hummed along to music on my phone while I brushed my teeth and figured if I could still go about like this, clearly I was fine. Even at that age, my body had cried wolf more times than I could count, so I responded the only way I knew how. After popping a couple Tylenol, I climbed back into bed and opened my laptop to do some job applications. At that time in my life, I was engaged to my high school sweetheart, Michael. In between wedding planning, being in college full-time, volunteering at my church, and desperately trying to escape Hobby Lobby, stress became my full-time hobby. Today, I can look back on these emotions differently, now that I have the luxury of hindsight and our divorce several years behind me. It's slightly amusing how many red flags were quietly waving in the background without me noticing, but that's another story. This one belongs to my appendix. The Tylenol did all of absolutely nothing. So I decided to upgrade my treatment plan. Heating pad, ice pack, hot shower, frozen bag of peas, sock of rice in the microwave, my personal favorite, popsicles, warm lemon water. At one point, I'm pretty sure I had both an ice pack and a heating pad on me simultaneously. I mean, if just one alone wasn't working, surely both at once would. Nothing touched it. As it was starting to get later in the day, I was lying on the couch in the living room, staring up at the ceiling. I kept telling myself that I just needed to get through this day without upstaging Leo's birthday. My body sank into the worn leather sofa as I negotiated with my pain, begging for it to go away even just for a little bit. All I wanted was to get through this one day so that I could be there for Leo's special birthday dinner. As I was groaning on the couch, my mom and Leo burst into the house, filled with birthday excitement. They had just gotten done collecting birthday freebies around town and were laughing at something. Both of them had armfuls of shopping bags that they plopped in the dining room before noticing me there. My mom looks over at me and asks, Cat, what's wrong?" I shrugged. Tummy troubles. Maybe I ate something weird. Another possibility popped in my head. What if it's appendicitis? I still have my appendix, but aren't I kind of too old for that? My mom immediately corrected me. No, appendicitis can happen at any age. Before I could say more, Leo chimed in with all the confidence of a newly turned 19-year-old. Nah, it's definitely not appendicitis. Oh yeah? You'd be in way more pain. I wondered this for all of 2 seconds before wholeheartedly agreeing. Oh yeah, you're probably right. We were, in fact, not right. My mom and Leo looked through our family coupon book and decided to take the party to BurgerFi, which happened to have one of my favorite meals. The excitement of going to BurgerFi had me ready to push myself a bit. I've always kind of wondered if Leo chose that particular restaurant because it was his favorite or because it's something we both loved. Knowing him, I think it was the latter. He always had this quiet way of taking care of people without making a big show of it. I was super excited to get my CEO burger and urban fries paired with enough garlic aioli to make a vampire consider filing a restraining order. Those fries were covered in Parmesan and truffle oil, 2 things I have never turned down once in my life. The burger was juicy and garlicky, exactly the kind of comfort food I thought I needed after the day I had. My dad was still at work and planned to meet us there. My mom and Leo drove separately while my fiance Michael came to pick me up. His younger sister Caitlin happened to be with him. The 2 of them spent most of the drive cracking jokes and teasing each other the way siblings always seem to do. Normally, I would have been right in the middle of their fun, but I just wasn't in an entertaining mood. Instead, I rested my forehead against the surprisingly cold window and watched the palm trees pass on our way downtown to downtown West Palm Beach, aka City Place. I probably won't be too exciting tonight, I warned them. My stomach's just a bit pissed at me right now. Michael nodded sympathetically before he drummed his fingers against the steering wheel with a heavy metal song. No one questioned it. Why would they? Even I didn't think this was anything out of the ordinary. It was just a really bad day. With chronic pain, some days are better than others. Michael was humming along to an intricately plucky guitar solo as we pulled into the parking garage at City Place. For a moment, I considered asking if we could just go home. Everything was hurting at that point. Walking sent pain like bolts of lightning. Standing was like a tree swaying in a Category 3 hurricane. Somehow, even sitting hurt too. We all decided, since we were already there, we would show our faces for at least a few minutes, since we were parked. After all, we wanted to get our burgers and validate our parking. Plus, I wasn't about to make Leo's birthday about me and my tummy troubles after missing his 18th birthday since I was living in Gainesville at the time. I pushed myself out of Michael's relatively new Toyota Corolla and steadied myself by grabbing Michael's arm. As we slowly walked to BurgerFi, I found myself gradually attaching myself to his arm. My face was contorted with concentration. Every step I took was like trudging through knee-deep ocean water. My feet were beginning to lose their negotiation against the ground. By the time we arrived, my parents had already ordered, and everyone was sitting outside enjoying the warm and breezy August evening. The sun was just beginning to set, and only a few tables were occupied. Summer's the off-season for the downtown area, and all the Northerners had long retreated. Everyone was enjoying themselves, except me. Florida summers typically have two settings, hot and did someone accidentally leave Earth's oven door open? Normally, I don't mind the heat or even humidity since I've lived here my entire life. The hospital I was born in, Palms West, was just a 30-minute drive away. The smell of burgers should have made me hungry, but instead my stomach was lurching. With the help of Leo, I collapsed into my chair, absent-mindedly pushed my food around for a while, and quietly zoned out while everyone else talked. Conversation floated around me in fragments, between talk about work and school and wedding plans. I honestly couldn't tell you what anyone said, because by then all my concentration was going toward my pain. Eventually, I found myself picking up a couple fries, examining them, and then putting them right back down, rubbing the oily Parmesan bits between my fingers. Judging by the pungent scent and slippery texture, I knew taking a bite would be pushing my luck. Then something both shocking yet completely expected happened. My mom's mouth was just about to take another bite when she stopped all at once. She wasn't subtle or polite about it either. She practically threw her burger down onto the little metal tray they served their food on. The clang of the food hitting the metal grabbed my attention. "Catherine, you need to go to the hospital." Her voice had a firmness that she reserved only for situations such as this one. My eyes rolled so hard, I'm surprised they didn't fall into my fries. "Mom," I sighed, "I'm fine." I was absolutely not fine, but pain has a way of making you defensive. Somewhere in my brain, I was convinced admitting I needed medical attention would mean I'd somehow failed to manage something I should have been able to do on my own. Of course, she wasn't buying it. "No," she said louder this time. "You are not fine." By now, the whole table was quiet and looking at us with mouthfuls of food. They didn't dare swallow. "You are as pale as a ghost. You're not eating one of your favorite meals, and you haven't said a single word since sitting down." Now, if you know me in real life, you know that last observation alone probably should have earned me a ride in an ambulance, because I can talk through almost anything. I've been told by many that sometimes I don't know when to shut up. Even when I have a dental hygienist in my mouth, or even when my voice is scratchy from the flu, I'm still talking. Conversation is the only way I've gotten through blood draws and stitches after childbirth. Silence is rarely a symptom I exhibit voluntarily. Looking down at my food, I gave a weak little laugh and tried one last desperate attempt to get out of going anywhere but my bed. "Sure," I said. "I'll go, if you pay for it." I expected at least a little hesitation from that, because it wouldn't be the first time they were stuck paying thousands for a doctor to say I'm perfectly fine. Much to my surprise, my mom was already standing, keys in her hand. She stood so quickly she nearly fell over herself. "Okay, we're going." Before I could insist for the millionth time that I was perfectly capable of dying quietly at home, Michael spoke up. He'd been quietly trying to mind his business up to that point, watching everything unfold. "Hold on," he said. "Are we sure she actually needs to go?" My dad, who had only recently arrived and had missed most of the day with me, looked between us with his usual calm, analytical expression. He considered the situation for a moment and said, "Well, her stomach was hurting before I left for work and was also hurting for the last 2 days. Getting it checked can't hurt. Worst case scenario, they'll tell her she's fine." As usual, my dad's voice held no drama or panic. My dad has always had a quiet, rational love that gives us calm in the middle of a storm. Michael considered for a moment and nodded. That made sense, so the decision was made. Michael's younger sister, Caitlin, who was a year younger than me, offered to drive his car home so he could ride with my dad and me to Good Samaritan Hospital. This hospital was only a few minutes away, and we had a close family friend who worked and still works there, Leo's best friend, Dr. Alex Kanur. My dad pulled his car around to the front of the restaurant so I wouldn't have to walk through the parking garage again. Michael hopped into the front passenger seat and I slid into the back seat, moving more like a snake than a human at that point. Every movement sent waves of pain through my entire body. Time seemed to move in slow motion as the drive jostled me across the scratchy cloth seats. The whole drive, tears flowed freely down my face. It wasn't a loud, dramatic sobbing, but a steady, salty stream mixed with little involuntary whimpers every time the car turned or bumped me. The 10-minute journey felt like an eternity as I stared longingly at the person sitting in the passenger seat, wishing he'd look back at me. Somewhere between BurgerFi and the emergency room, I finally stopped debating if I was overreacting. I still had no idea what was wrong, but for the first time all day, I believed that something actually was. This is where my panic began to set in. This wasn't the first or even second time I had been rushed to the hospital for an actual near-death experience. That's when I realized this would become the 4th time I'd almost die. As we pulled into the hospital parking lot, Dad turned around in his seat and looked at me, calm and composed. "I think before we go in, Michael and I should give you a blessing." During that time of my life, I was still very much involved in the Mormon church, and priesthood blessings were treated as something deeply sacred. It wasn't long before that Michael received the Melchizedek priesthood, and he had still yet to give his first blessing. This meant I would be the first person he used this gift for. I remember thinking, well, this certainly wasn't how I pictured him using it for the first time. The 3 of us sat in the car, illuminated by the yellowish glow of the street lights. My dad pulled out the little vial of consecrated oil he always carried. Michael looked terrified. Not because of me exactly, but more because he wanted to do everything correctly. Here he was being tested in real time with his future wife and father-in-law. My dad quietly coached him through anointing my head while Michael repeated the words, stumbling a bit since he'd never actually said them before. Then my dad placed his hands on my head and gave the blessing itself. It was brief, and honestly, I couldn't tell you today exactly what was said. That's one thing everyone always asks me when I tell this story, because my dad has always had a way of finding the most meaningful words. Pain has a way of erasing details. What I do remember, though, is a deep feeling of calmness afterwards. My body didn't feel less pain, but I felt the panic drain from me all at once. Today, I can admit, it wasn't necessarily because I believed God had reached down and taken my fear. My wave of serenity had much more to do with knowing my dad and fiance loved me enough to stop everything they were doing to focus entirely on me for those few minutes, Whether you call it faith or nurturing love, it gave me my feet the steadiness to walk into the hospital unassisted. Standing in the parking lot, I looked over at Michael. "Will you come in with me?" I asked. He hesitated there, eyes wide. I can't. There was going to be no convincing him because once his mind was made up, that was that. Hospitals made him deeply uncomfortable. I knew some of the reasons, but not all of them. After all, we were engaged, and I thought we'd have years to unpack each other's fears. After kissing him on the cheek, my dad and I went inside together. Upon seeing me, the nurses had me in a wheelchair within minutes, wheeling me to a private room. This hospital was usually full, and tonight was no exception. Getting your own room instead of being shoved in some hallway wasn't always standard. Turns out, while my dad was doing his part to get me to the hospital, my mom had contacted our family friend who worked at the hospital. This friend of ours personally called the emergency room so they would be ready for my arrival. The wheelchair should have been my first clue that this definitely wasn't going to be a quick visit, and that I definitely wasn't going to be at my scheduled Hobby Lobby shift. The next day, laying in the hospital room, the lights were painfully bright in a way that made my head scream. Even with the hot Florida evening outside and the pile of warm blankets I was covered in, the room was absolutely freezing. Everything smelled so aggressively sterile, with the unmistakable combination of disinfectant and hand sanitizer. My mom and Leo arrived, so my dad could go home and rest, just in case he was going to work tomorrow. He kissed me on the forehead before leaving. Thankfully, my mom arrived just in time for the nurse to pepper me with questions about how long the pain had been happening, where it was, and any other symptoms. I answered the questions between winces, apologizing every few sentences. "I'm sorry. This is probably just another bad period." I tried to force a chuckle out of me, but it wouldn't come. "Or maybe I'll actually be sick this time and have appendicitis." The nurse gave me one of those polite little smiles it seems healthcare workers have perfected. I'm sure you've seen it once or twice if you've been in similar shoes to mine. Another nurse came in and started my IV. The nurse poking me with the IV was thankfully chatty enough that I managed to only throw up a couple times. Then, without much warning, they pushed morphine. Now, I had never had morphine before. One minute I was curled into a ball wondering if I was dying, and the next I remember thinking, oh, so this is how people get addicted to pain medicine. I'm kidding, mostly, but the relief was almost immediate. For the first time all day, my body unclenched. The pain wasn't completely gone, but had turned down from screaming to whispering. Not long after that, they wheeled me away for a CT scan. I remember staring up at the ceiling tiles as the contrast dye made its way through my veins with its unmistakable warmth and flavor. The machine buzzed around me, making me feel like I was about to blast off in a space shuttle. The nagging fear that the doctor was going to come in and announce I'm perfectly fine kept repeating through me. However, something entirely different happened. To me, it felt like a plot twist, but to anyone else witnessing this story, this was inevitable. A doctor walked in holding a tablet with my scan results. She was looking at me with an expression that was equal parts reassuring, concerned, and impressed. She said something I absolutely didn't expect. "So, you were right. It is appendicitis." The doctor explained that my appendix was what needed to be served an eviction notice. The good news was that they'd caught it before it ruptured. The bad news was that the surgeon they wanted to do the operation wouldn't be available until the next morning. So that meant I'd be spending the night in the hospital. That night was mostly a morphine-shaped blur. where I vaguely remember being woken every hour or so to check my vitals, IV bags being swapped, and desperately trying to stay untangled from the tubes and wires. As uncomfortable as I was, my mom and Leo were much more uncomfortable. My mom was sleeping on the couch next to me, and Leo was sleeping on the floor. Neither of them left my side throughout the whole time I was there. Somehow I still hoped I'd wake up to this whole thing being a dream or an elaborate joke. The next morning, our family friend Dr. Alex Knor, who happened to be an anesthesiologist at Good Samaritan Hospital and the father of Leo's best friend, Lex Knor, came into my room before my surgery. He spoke with the surgeon and somehow managed to get the schedule moved around for my operation to go from 11 o'clock to 8. I was incredibly grateful it was him as my anesthesiologist. Something my mom and I have in common, our bodies have an iffy relationship with anesthesia, causing blood pressure problems, post-surgical nausea and vertigo, and another time I woke up on the operating table. Thankfully, that one happened before anything actually started, but it's a memory that still lingers just enough that going under doesn't exactly thrill me. Dr. Knor smiled down at me and reassured me that I was going to be safe and well taken care of by him and his colleagues. I've always felt a gentle, caring energy from him in a way that made sense. The ceiling started getting fuzzy, people's voices were getting farther, and as usual, I never got to finish counting down from 10. The next thing I remember is hearing Leo's voice as he was getting dangerously close to my face to study my slowly opening eyes. My consciousness was coming in slowly as I realized he was trying to say something to me. Bro? Hey bro! Yeah? I managed to croak through a throat that felt so dry and scratchy. Bro, your appendix was so bad they had to remove your butthole. Leo's words came out so fast and jumbled, like he had been saving me, that little joke, for hours. On one hand, his joke was absolutely hilarious, but in my defense, I had just come back to Earth from that cocktail of anesthesia juice. I wasn't exactly operating on all cylinders, so for one horrifying second, I believed him. I blinked confusedly and whispered, "What the fuck?" My mom was in the room with us, and under normal circumstances, she would have absolutely scolded me for my language. Either she didn't hear me since I was so quiet, or I had claimed my one free curse without consequence pass. My mom sighed and situated her reading glasses on top of her head. "Stop scaring her," she said in a way that was slightly scolding before looking back at me. "They did not remove your butthole." Apparently, though, they had removed a small section of my colon, because my appendix hadn't just been inflamed. It had become enormous. The little thing had become so enlarged, in fact, that the scar tissue from years of inflammation had managed to wrap itself around part of my colon. That meant when the surgeon removed my grapefruit-sized appendix, they also had to remove about an inch of my colon with it. As I was processing the onslaught of information, Dr. Knor walked into the room. "Oh, Sleeping Beauty's awake," he said with a sly grin. "Man, that thing was huge." Then he looked over at my mom, who was sitting cross-legged on the chair by me. "Shauna, did you get the picture?" My mom looked absolutely horrified. "Catherine doesn't need to know about the picture." "I absolutely do need to see that picture," I immediately interrupted. She resisted for approximately 3 seconds, since she knew I was far less likely to give in. The picture of my appendix was absolutely disgusting, but I also found it to be deeply fascinating. It was by far the coolest thing I'd ever had removed from my body. While my mom stood there ready to pounce for a bag for me to puke in, or at the very least recoil in horror, Leo and I were busy making appendix and butt jokes. We were also both marveling over how ridiculously oversized the thing was. Generally, an appendix will rupture long before it can get as big as it did. For obvious reasons, I will not be including a photograph with this story, but I do have it within my possession. Though I don't plan to share it publicly, if you ask me nicely, I'll send it in a private message. Dr. Kanur laughed along with us before casually mentioning that one of his colleagues was writing a medical article and wanted to include the picture. Apparently, my appendix was noteworthy enough to make academic rounds. As far as I've heard, the picture of my appendix still circulates through medical lectures. This wasn't exactly the claim to fame I envisioned for myself, but I find it more than a little amusing that this situation only came to be from my body betraying me. Later, the surgeon stopped by and confirmed that it was the largest appendix he had ever removed in all his years, and he wasn't a young doctor. He believed it had been probably inflaming and healing, gathering scar tissue and becoming larger each time until it finally reached the point where it had to start claiming the real estate of other organs, like my colon. I spent the day shuffling painfully around the hospital floor, dragging my IV behind me. Everyone kept reminding me that walking would get all the trapped air, moving. The air bubbles moving my organs back into their properly situated places felt like I was a shaken snow globe trying to find equilibrium. The recovery was more painful than I expected, but thankfully I was in the perfect place to have my pain managed. Many people sent messages that day to check on me, like everyone in my family group chat, my best friends Sam and Elitza, and even my ex, Julian. It was incredible to see how many people cared about me. The following day, I was looking forward to all of the visitors that I was promised. Messages on my phone kept rolling in as the door to my hospital room became a revolving door. My little room was absolutely packed with visitors at one point. Michael's mom and stepdad, his dad and stepmom, his 4 siblings, and even a couple of his cousins were packed in with me like sardines. Caitlin expressed that she was happy to see me alive and well after how I looked at BurgerFi. I made a passing joke with her that if I were to have died, at least my nails were on point. The parents were a bit concerned about my dark sense of humor, but his siblings seemed to appreciate it. There was one person who I wanted to be there who I made a lot of excuses for. My parents had a lot to say about it, but I felt protective over him. However, it wasn't lost on me that I heard from my ex before my fiance. The next day, I was determined to get out of the hospital and back to living my darn life. Unfortunately, there was a roadblock between me and my discharge paperwork that would act as a shiny golden ticket out. A bowel movement. Apparently, after abdominal surgery where they remove an inch of your colon, they don't just let you leave the moment your pain is no longer a 10. They want proof that everything inside of you has started working again. While completely reasonable, it felt a little humiliating having nurses poking their heads in, asking about the quantity of my farts. The surgeon made it abundantly clear that until I defecated, I wasn't going anywhere. In fact, I overheard nurses saying that without pooping, I might need additional surgery. My painful little shuffles through the halls became endless laps, where the nurses were all cheering me on. My emotional support water bottle didn't leave my side as I chugged and chugged, waiting for it to help my situation. As I completed what felt like the 100th lap, there was a nurse at my room ready to check my vitals. My exasperation was beginning to show, and I could see the nurse felt bad for me. While checking my blood pressure, she casually offered, "We can always try suppository." At that point, my dignity had packed its bags several days earlier, if I ever had it at all. Suppositories weren't unfamiliar territory for me with my lifelong chronic constipation. "Absolutely," I said, "let's do it." On my hands and knees, I breathed in and out slowly as the nurse guided the slippery little thing into me. The pig-like squeal that escaped me was completely involuntary. As the nurse began heading to her next patient, I saw an incoming call from an unsaved number. Seeing as I had job applications floating through the universe, I figured I should probably go ahead and answer. I answered with a chipper hello, and sure enough, it was Chick-fil-A, calling to do a quick phone interview. So there I was, still wearing a hospital gown, IV taped to my arm, a glycerin suppository in my ass, waddling through the halls with my butt cheeks squeezed together and answering interview questions. My answers must have been what they wanted to hear, because they ended the call with, "So, when can you come in for an in-person interview?" Well, I looked around my sterile surroundings. I actually just had my appendix removed. I should be able to come in once I'm discharged. Not gonna lie, if they asked me to come straight from the hospital wearing my gown, I absolutely would have done it. Thankfully, though, they said I could call them and schedule for a couple days after. A couple hours after the suppository was supposed to have worked its magic, I had still yet to see anything happen. All I knew is that I desperately needed to get out of there, so my mind began to work on a solution. Some were borderline insane. Then, like a divine revelation sent straight from years of digestive misfortune paired with the interview I just had, a thought popped into my head. I'm lactose intolerant, and one of the foods that happened to give me guaranteed bathroom action was Chick-fil-A milkshakes. My dad happened to be there when the inspiration struck me. Dad, he looked up. I need a Chick-fil-A cookies and cream milkshake. He looked at me like I'd lost what little sanity the anesthesia didn't take. I don't think you're supposed to have that, he said. They've got you on a pretty strict diet. He pointed over the door that still had my dietary restrictions posted on it, but I wasn't going to back down without a fight. Dad, that milkshake is my ticket out of here. I don't know if he believed my scientific explanation or if he was simply tired of seeing his little girl trapped. But less than an hour later, I had a milkshake straight from my future employer sitting in front of me. Leo was the delivery boy, so of course it had extra cherries, exactly how I've always gotten it. The second it was in front of me, I consumed it with the urgency of someone hiding contraband from the prison guard. I was fully convinced a nurse would round the corner and yell at me to drop the dairy. Thankfully, no one caught me. And much to no one's surprise, it worked. Not long after, I triumphantly informed the nurse that I had finally had my required bowel movement. Now, in my family, for me and my other siblings who have experienced constipation, the running joke is one of my brothers who would triumphantly shout through the halls, "Great news!" because it truly was. Constipation is no joke. Coming from someone who has been hospitalized and had a child of mine in the hospital for constipation, don't get me started about fiber. I texted the family group chat my great news and got some sufficient laughing and heart emojis sent my way. It was truly the greatest possible news that I could finally go back home and cuddle with my dog. All I wanted was to go home. Looking back now, it's funny which moments stick with you the strongest. It wasn't just the surgeon telling me I had the biggest appendix he'd ever seen. It wasn't just the phone interview I had while negotiating a suppository. Not even waking up briefly concerned that I no longer had a butthole overshadows the biggest thing of all. The thing I remember the very most is the moment my mom knew something was deeply wrong just by looking at my face. It was the fact that her love and concern for me is likely what saved my life. and she never left my side throughout the entire experience. Though I went through one of the most painful experiences of my life, it was a beautiful thing to see just how much my family loves me. The end. Thank you if you stuck around this long, and if you genuinely are concerned, well, if you genuinely are interested in seeing this grapefruit-sized monstrosity, maybe you can convince me to send it to you privately, but I don't think that I can post it anywhere without getting 86'd by some kind of, algorithm. All right, y'all have a great night.